Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very excited to bring you Cam Bagrie again. He started our whole webinar series, and now he's going to end it for the 2020 series for NZX. But Cam, let's just rip straight into this. What a massive 24 hours. What's been happening?
Well, you got the Minister of Finances, fired off a letter to the Reserve Bank. It says, let's think a little bit more differently in regard to the property market, which people have taken different interpretations in regard to what it means. Some people think it's interfering on the Reserve Bank's independence. My personal view is it's not, but there's a fine balancing act because, of course, as soon as you sent off that letter, you've seen a market response, and the market response is least chance of interest rates. Interest rates are up about 10 basis points across the curve. New Zealand dollar's down now up about sort of 70 cents against the greenback. Kiwi Aussie's up a little bit as well, although it's come back a little bit of late. But if you sit back and think about the bigger picture here, look, the bigger picture to me is pretty simple. We've got an economic ledger and we've got a social ledger. And the Reserve Bank's been going pretty big, pretty hard to try to fix that economic ledger, get inflation back up to 2%, get back towards full employment. Now, unfortunately, a byproduct of the Reserve Bank deploying all those tools to try to achieve what's in their remit is that you're going to see house prices move up. And everybody's been surprised, myself included, in regard to how far the market has moved. But pre-COVID, two big themes there were housing affordability and income inequality. The housing market was on fire in the regions pre-COVID. Well, little Lucifer, the Reserve Bank, has come out and lit more of a fire. In fact, it's more of a bonfire at the moment. So we're off to the races. And now that might be good economically because it shows us that monetary policy works. Unfortunately, from the social side of the ledger, it's making she's more problematic. And when you sort of society's now pushing back pretty clearly. In the past 2 weeks, it's been amazing to see the turn across the media, or it's almost like society's conscience has been pricked to that sort of 9th degree. And what do we see today? Well, the Minister of Finances, he's fired off a letter yesterday. And there's some stuff that the Reserve Bank can do. I'd like to see them get given debt to income limits as a macroprudential tool, which the Reserve Bank puts it up. The Minister of Finance sort of ticks it off. So, I think that letter's partly an invitation to put some stuff on the table, and I'll tick it off. Why asset prices were removed from the Reserve Bank's policy targets agreement or the remit last time around is beyond me. It should still be included, so maybe we need to look at getting that back in there. But bottom line, any tweaks we make towards the Reserve Bank, it's buying time. It's thinking around the edges. Fundamental problem with the property market is supply. And you can't go pointing the finger at that in regard to the Reserve Bank. That's the government. That's the other side of the street. So it's going to take a little bit of time to get that thing up and running.
Jeepers. So last night you fired off a bit of a tweet about the rural industry and the value. Do you want us and which got some awesome conversation? Let's get into it. Like what was your thinking behind that, and what do you think needs to happen next?
There was a little bit of background to that because I think there was a little bit of messaging, tweeting going around about the economic impact of the tourism sector, and there's some numbers that were floating around the past 48 hours in regard to what the economic hit was going to be over the coming sort of year. And look, the tourism sector is a big part of New Zealand. But I guess one of the lessons out of COVID is that we probably over-exaggerated how big tourism's contribution was to the New Zealand economy. Because we looked at it through, tourists not coming in as opposed to netting off, well, we're not spending overseas as well. And what, of course, we saw within the winter months was that, we couldn't travel overseas. And what tends to happen over the winter months is that more New Zealanders tend to travel overseas and foreigners come in. So lo and behold, there was a lot more Kiwis floating around during the winter months than who was overseas. So net on New Zealand economically was probably a little bit better off. So we saw this big thing called the substitution effect. We didn't spend money overseas, we spent it locally. Now the rubber's hitting the road over the Christmas months. You sort of November, December, January, February, March. The tourism sector, in fact, the New Zealand economy, there's going to be 150 to 200,000 fewer people across the economy over the next sort of 4 to 5 months. So that's about 3 to 4% of your usually resident population. So it's a big number. So there is a bit of a hole. But if you sit there, if you work it out through a net basis, yeah, the net contribution to tourism is around 3% of GDP.
Yeah.
Now, if I have a look at net food exports, like net food exports are $31 billion. So we used to sort of characterise New Zealand as being a nice place to visit and one big farm. Well, sorry, we generally speaking, we just still one big farm, because the impact on the rural community or producing food massively dwarfs the impact on tourism. And what have we seen in the past 12 months? Your rural pastoral exports, they're up. And they're up quite sharply. They've gone from about 30 to 31.5 sort of billion. What's the lessons in that? Well, the world's needed to eat. We've been able to supply sort of food. We've kept the supply chain open. The supply chains around the globe are just getting thrown into disarray, which has been a huge opportunity for New Zealand, because we've been able to put the stuff out. But now, of course, we're starting to see the more that global supply chain gets disrupted, it's a bit of a problem getting the containers back in before we can push them back out as well. So it's a little bit of it's a two-way problem, but it's still a nice problem in regard to where we sit. Yeah, but stepping back again, it's a good place to be. We have not seen the economic impact of COVID across rural communities. In fact, I'd argue that some districts across New Zealand are probably better off because of COVID, because they're rural backed, so rural incomes are up, and they don't tend to travel they don't tend to see an awful lot of overseas travel. Whether people in the regions might travel overseas. Well, they're not travelling. No one used to come in there anyway few people into Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, these sort of places. So net on that, there's probably more cash in the bank across those regions. So your rural New Zealand, if I have a look at job ads as a share of where they were in 2019, across some rural aligned regions in New Zealand, they're above where they were in 2019. There has not been a recession. There has not been a COVID hit across big parts of the rural society in New Zealand.
Which is a positive story, right? And I think too, someone made a comment on your feed around environment, that there wasn't really that focus, and I'm sure some tourism people might think differently, but there wasn't really that thought process around the impact on environment from having tourists everywhere. Whereas, farmers are genuinely every day working on the environment as well as the economy. And as you talked about before, they're working on both sides of the ledger to try and bring the social and the economics together.
Yeah, look, it's stepping back. There's a big theme here. It's the long game versus the short game. Thinking a lot more about communities, people, sustainability, the environment, that sort of stuff. And the rural sector is a lot more advanced than other parts of New Zealand. All right. So I have a look. I wrote a cheeky article, I think it was 3 to 4 months ago, that talked about, imagine if we had if we had the urban equivalent of a farm management plan, what would it look like in regard to being responsible for this sort of thing? How much water are you putting on the lawn? Have you tested the soil moisture? What are you doing with your fertilizer? All these sort of things that we ask of farmers, and we wrap it up in a farm management plan. Well, we haven't sort of rolled that sort of stuff into communities yet. But of course, the environment is everybody's problem.
Absolutely.
And we need to treat it as such, and including the tourism sector. So we were at peak tourist. A little bit like, to be fair, we're probably at peak cow. The problem is that the dairy sector was sort of acknowledging, yes, we were at peak cow. We were moving along in regard to what we needed to do. Whereas the tourism sector's probably needed COVID for that big old wake-up call in regard to what's going to take place. And now you got the minister coming out there, and they're talking about completely different tourist numbers or who's going to be turning up. It's going to be really interesting how that unfolds, because suddenly we don't want the backpackers anymore. But I'll give you a bit of a heads up. Those backpackers, there used to be about 60,000 of them running around the country at any time. But they were the most incredible mobile workforce New Zealand has ever seen. Who's going to be picking the fruit across the horticulture sectors of Central Otago, up in the Hawke's Bay, up in Tauranga, Bay of Plenty, these sort of things? Because the stats I've seen out of some of the orchardists is that the good pickers, they're still getting $25, $30 an hour.
Yeah.
But they're going for it.
So if we look into 2021 for ag, I mean, and this is a very leading question, it's not likely to slow, and there's probably good potential going forward as well, isn't there? It's not it doesn't feel like it's a boom. It feels like it's a step up in consistent movement or positivity, I guess, as far as economic.
Look, in this environment, if you can get as steady as she goes, that's one hell of a good story. And that's broadly what it's been across the rural sector, across New Zealand. We're obviously seeing a bit of segmentation. As the dairy prices, generally speaking, surprised on the upside. And that's been a really good story because the dairy sector is where all the debt is. And we knew there were problems across the dairy sector, but we're seeing that the sector's deleveraging. We're seeing interest-only loans as a share of total loans is starting to steadily come down. It's still got a long way to go. Yeah, but those hard communications those hard conversations have been had. But we're going through an adjustment in a really orderly fashion. Are we seeing some weakness? You have points of vulnerability. You got wool. And we're seeing, pockets of the red meat schedule starting to come under a bit of pressure as well. People globally, we're not eating out at restaurants, but we still want the minced patties because we still need to eat that sort of stuff. So we're seeing the substitution switching effect, which is going on. One of the things that I do think about, though, going forward is that what does the world look like post-COVID? And how much is behaviour gonna change? Because now, if I think about a New Zealand business, imagine if you're a New Zealand importing business and imports across New Zealand at the moment, items, it's tough to get stuff. So suddenly you're sourcing items to sell to consumers, or that car, that jet ski, that boat, or that intermediate good, you can't get the stuff. So now you're starting to think about, do I need to have a backup in regard to my supply chains? Now I think about that stuff through the reciprocal because New Zealand exports or imports into other countries around the globe. Now other countries around the globe that have suddenly found their food supply chain disrupted, they're going to start to think about how they secure that food supply chain. And that could present some threats to the agriculture sector down the track if people start to really build about locally. We're seeing countries such as Singapore, and Singapore can't feed themselves, but they're trying to import a little bit less. But we're going to start to see these sort of themes. COVID is an accelerant on change. It's getting people thinking a lot more differently. So yes, the agriculture sector has done pretty well, all things considered, out of this, but we still need to think about the future, what's going to lab grown meat, all this sort of stuff. Are people going to be investing a lot more in technology? And part of this is just to secure your food supply chain.
So keep adapting, keep looking at it. There's no set and forget. Like, it's good now, and people need to eat, but we can never be complacent, can we?
Well, and this is a big theme I've been hot on for a couple of years because getting into COVID, look, glass half full. New Zealand was in really good macroeconomic shape. We didn't have those big points of vulnerability we had 2006, 2007, where we were building too many houses. There were all these finance companies making stupid lending. So you are absolutely primed for a bit of a visit from the Grim Reaper. And lo and behold, we got a visit from the Grim Reaper. This time around, because we didn't have a lot of those structural problems in place, we were still in a reasonable space to sort of move forward. But it's going to be interesting in regard to how this sort of thing pans out going forward. Way back 2018, Suncorp did a survey which asked firms, look in the rearview mirror, have you been disrupted? Now, disruption is not just about technology. The biggest disruptor in New Zealand is Mother Nature. It's seismic events. Another big one is people dealing with different generations. It's dealing with government policy. And one thing we know is that government policy is not standing still. They're getting a lot more interventionist. So we've got to be adaptable. What was interesting out of that survey was that when firms were asked about change going forward, they expected the pace of change to slow, which is like, wow. That's like a cannabis smoking at the moment. It just ain't going to take place. But what that actually told us, I think, was a lot of firms were pretty complacent. Now, if we ever look at what's happened over COVID, we've seen some great stories about businesses adapting. These little takeaway outfits that have suddenly got an online experience capability to get the stuff out there because they couldn't sell face to face. Online platforms, being distributed. You have firms embracing the digital economy. of course, you've also got an awful lot of people out there at the moment that weren't in that digital sort of space. You weren't thinking through a non-linear, exponential sort of lens. So this is, there's a lot of talk out there at the moment about what's called the K-shaped cycle. The K is you want to be on the top part of the K, heading up. You're digital, you're adaptive, you're flexible. You've got a different mindset to those firms that are on the bottom side of the K. We're seeing that. You think about traditional mainstream retail versus digital online retail in regard to what's going on. Those firms that are adapting, they're having some phenomenal numbers. I don't think I've ever seen New Zealand at the moment this two-tiered, where we've got this massive gap, these great success stories versus these other firms at the moment are thinking the world's caving in.
Or even worse, some I talk to, which really scares me, is the wording used when it gets back to normal, and it's almost like this fantasy that next year is just going to be magically how it was and better and easier.
Yeah, it's there is no normal, but that's the firms, individuals, people that are thinking in a linear space. 1 + 1 = 2. It doesn't. It equals 11. You look at. I used to work for a bank, right? Yeah. So I saw the announcement at one bank the other day. Won't name names, but they're shutting 38 branches in the next sort of 24 months. Well, they were going to shut those 38 branches in the next 5 to 10 years anyway. It was going to take place. We all know it. COVID's just an accelerant. It's just bringing things forward in regard to stuff that was going to take place anyway, and we just needed to adapt accordingly.
And I think it's, you're talking a lot about digital, and I guess that's and there's been lots of reports out now, lots of research showing that digital space, we need to engage more, we need to adapt more in that space. I was talking to an awesome wine grower yesterday, and, through COVID, she got online and got, winemaker, not wine grower. And she got online and has online, and you can buy one bottle at a time, and you can, she's got this amazing carbon positive wine, and it's all these things where she was saying it's kind of created this whole new network for her.
Oh yeah, look here. Imagine if you were supplying wine into Air New Zealand or upper end, eating out outfits around the globe, where your market's just been absolutely carted. But there's opportunities out of this. I saw the retail sales numbers the other day, and if you ever look at your supermarkets, they've just had a big structural uplift because we're just eating from home a little bit more. And guarantee we're eating different items instead of eating out a lot more. We're going to be buying stuff, and all of a sudden you're buying the extra couple of bottles of wine a week, all these sort of things. But I think there are structural shifts. Yes, there will be a little bit of going back to what could you call it, the old normal, but maybe the old normal was a little bit more abnormal. Maybe we're traveling a little bit too much. One of the big things about COVID was a little bit of reset in regard to think about what do you actually need in your lives, what's important. I actually quite enjoyed lockdown in regard to wandering around the streets, walking up the hills, in fact, walking down the middle of the street because there was no cars. There was someone on the left-hand path, there was someone on the right-hand path, you sort of waved to each other. But all of a sudden you look at your bank account and you realise, boy, there's a bit of money in that bank account because I'm not getting out and blowing all the loot and frivolous stuff. So a little bit of a reset.
Yeah, absolutely. So, around that retail sales though, some other economic numbers have come in reasonably positive as well. Like, is it just delayed whatever the perceived impact was going to be, or do you think it's actually we've adapted well enough in some areas to actually pick up some of the slack?
I think there's a couple of things that have been going on. Look, one, I think we underestimated what's called the substitution effect. Those behavioural shifts, that reorientated money from overseas that's just been pushed into the New Zealand economy, whether that be on a domestic holiday, buying a new car, spa pool, redecorating the house, buying a bed, you name it. But New Zealanders have been out there spending en masse over those winter months. Now, we still haven't really seen what's called the income effect of COVID. The income effect is fewer tourists. That's a summer story. The income effect is what happens to the rural sector. We're seeing that a little bit in parts, but it's still not. Normally when you go through a big major global shock, commodity prices just tank. We have not seen commodity prices tank at the moment. The fact that the New Zealand dollar is up a little bit higher reflects a couple of things, but one of the reasons is the fact that commodity prices are still pretty buoyant. So the farmers have got cash in the bank. The banks are probably, to be fair, taking a fair bit of that cash in regard to paying it back. But we haven't really seen that income effect come through. But we've also seen is a pretty strong stimulus effect. The Reserve Bank went big. So if you think about it, there's a lot of animosity, criticisms of the Reserve Bank at the moment between your economics versus the social side of the ledger. And I think that's warranted. But look, hey, presto, monetary policy works. Look, when you get a $100 billion increase in the housing market, which is what's happened in the last 12 months, people are going to spend more. The wealth effect is worth about 3 cents in every dollar of increase in wealth. So $100 billion increase in wealth, the housing market, it's worth about $3 billion into the retail sector. Now that sort of money is being deployed as we speak. You drive around New Zealand, no shortage of orange cones or people in orange vests, that sort of stuff with the helmets on. That government money is getting rolled out as we speak at the moment. So the two big policy levers have actually worked really well. And I think we're going to be surprised with how strong the economy is compared to expectations when we start to see the data. But it's a long game, not a short game. There's still 2021, 2022. I still think there's a fair bit of water to flow under the bridge. The stuff that we've pulled forward today, you've bought a new car. Well, you don't do that every 6 months. You don't go out and buy a new bed every 6 months or a new spa pool. So there's going to be a little bit of a rubber hit the road effect in 2021. Now, the hope is that the general economy is firing up a little bit more by first quarter, second quarter next year. My personal view, it's still going to take a little bit of time, but relative to what we thought 6 odd months ago, the economic story is hellishly better. And we just need to acknowledge that. And we're starting to see financial markets are starting to reflect that as well. So after the letter from the Reserve Bank, from the Minister of Finance yesterday, of course, now markets are not pricing in a negative OCR.
Yep.
And they're pricing on a little bit of a nudge lower, emphasis on a little bit, but interest rates are up about 10 basis points. And the New Zealand dollar is a little bit higher. So financial conditions have tightened. Now, to be fair, they should have tightened because things are actually a lot better, and we just need to acknowledge it. It's a good story.
Yeah, and it's sad, isn't it? Because I remember talking to Spring Sheep a few months ago, and they're doing great, but they feel funny talking about it. I think we've almost our businesses that are actually doing well and succeeding feel almost a bit guilty to talk about the success that they're having. And I think we've probably got to keep encouraging the good stories out, because success or positivity grows more positivity and more success. And it worries me that we just focus on those real negatives at the moment.
Yeah, but this is part of the K-shaped cycle where it's almost like you go through the biggest economic shock in history, and firms are a little bit embarrassed because they're going well. But firms need to think about, well, why are they going well? But there's all these different challenges, right? You think about Queenstown. Like Queenstown is hemorrhaging, right? They put on a brave face, but when you don't get all these tourists coming in, but you're not going to get 30,000 plus Chinese tourists coming within the month of February. Queenstown is going to hurt. If I look at the number of people on the job seeker benefit down in Queenstown as a share of Queenstown Lake's population, 1.3%. It's basically got full employment. So you saw the biggest problem down there at the moment for a lot of people is actually getting the staff. The mobile workforce, the backpackers have actually disappeared. Through in Central Otago, where I sort of grew up, Alexander, Roxburgh, Clyde, these sort of places, there's some, I think there's about 700 people on a benefit, of which about 350, 400 a job seeker. Half of those are unavailable for work. So you've probably got, 250, 300 people you sort of tap into to pick all the fruit. There's a lot of fruit to pick in Central Otago over the next 6 months. And all of a sudden, we get into a different realm where we realise we've actually been under-investing in people, capability. Yeah. We've actually been probably over-reliant upon that imported workforce. And that's becoming a big point of vulnerability at the moment, because we need to get the stuff off. Well, I'm looking pretty closely at the cherries, how that sector goes, because they're not small, but they've got a little bit of size. If they can get the stuff off, what's the cost of going to be getting the stuff to market? Because that could be a little bit of bellwether for other parts of the horticulture sector, your really big players, your kiwi fruit, your apples, the other summer fruits heading into the new year. And we're looking for early indications in regard to what's going on.
Yeah. Do you think there's a shift in mindset around that? Because it kind of intrigues me a little that I know this is significantly amplified through COVID, but you know, it feels like it's for 20 years we've kind of had a bit of an issue with labour in the ag sector, and our only solution in 20 years was to come up with importing people that might work under, at times, not always, more difficult conditions. You know, do you think there needs to be a mindset shift around how we pay the people, the hours, all these sorts of things?
Well, there's a whole lot of things that need to take place, but probably the biggest problem we've got across New Zealand at the moment, or one of the big ones, is just mobility of the labour force. So if I have a look at Otago, for instance, look, Otago pre-COVID, job seeker numbers as share of the working age population was like 2.8%. If you look at job seeker numbers in Gisborne, Northland, it was in excess of 8% of the working age population. This is pre-COVID. Now, if you look at what's happened post-COVID at the moment, your job seeker numbers as a share of the working age population down in Otago was 3.8%. So it's up, but it's still really low. Well, you don't have that big pool of labour that's actually available to do a lot of the jobs. What do we got up in Northland and Gisborne, these sort of places? Your job seeker numbers as a share of the working age population is double digit. Now, that's how jobs are available. How do we mobilise people around the country? And the poor old Adrian Orr, the Reserve Bank, he can't fix this sort of stuff. He can't get people from A to B. Down in Otago, it's bad enough to get people to try to jump on a bus from Gore to Dunedin to go through to Central Otago. But the industry needs to start to think about, well, how do they present themselves? And maybe you start to think, pay's probably a natural lever. Yeah, but you're talking to a few orchardists. There's a big productivity difference between the seasonal guys that come in, the backpackers versus the typical Kiwi. People say that horticulture is a low-wage industry, but the numbers I've seen is that the good pickers are making 25 to 35 bucks an hour. Right? A lot of Kiwis that get there, they don't make the hourly rate. They pick 1 to 2 bins of apples. Right, so the old orchardist is actually topping them up to the hourly rate because they're actually not making the minimum. And so there's issues on all sides, but we need to be pragmatic in regard to how we're solving these sort of things.
Yeah, and you wonder too, there's probably different motivations, isn't there? When you're backpacking and you're having fun and you're with a whole lot of other backpackers and you just want to whip through the apple orchard, and the quicker you pick the apples, the quicker you get on to having another week off or having, going to the next destination or whatever, then I guess that's quite a different driver than I need work and I'm picking apples.
Well, I was brought up on an orchard, right? And, picking fruit, got me through university and I made some really good coin, all right? So at the height of the cherry season, and this is way back in the early 1990s, I was knocking back $1,000 a week. And that was in the early 1990s, right? So, and that was, there was only a couple of weeks you could make that sort of money. Well, boy, did you go for it. So if you want to go for it, you can make the money, right? It's actually there. But I don't know, we could go on and on. You look at Southland that's been importing in the Filipinos to milk the cows, that sort of stuff. There's big structural issues across the labour market on multiple levels. And it's just about mobility. Because we've been importing labour for a long time, I don't think we've been investing in critical people, staff, these sort of things. And now COVID is just a wake-up call. We need to make that reinvestment, and a lot of it's central government because they control, of course, an awful lot of the training institutions, but the firms need to step up to the plate here as well and think about this a lot more. And think about a lot more things through a risk management lens. Risk management in regard to staff, risk management in regard to securing credit, making sure your lines are intact. Risk management in regard to importing goods. 2/3 of New Zealand's imported products are capital and intermediate goods. It's not the fun stuff. not the stuff we bring in from China. It's the stuff that actually go into the production process to help us make all stuff, other stuff. And what we're now seeing at the moment is that we're struggling to find those things.
And it comes back to, you know, what you've always talked about is macro versus micro. And, you know, you've got to keep your focus on your micro to get that right, which is all your risk management and breaking down your processes and supply chain and understanding where your risks lie.
Yeah, I find, people tend to talk, an awful lot about macro, but the macro stuff, it's beyond your control. You can't influence it. When push comes to shove, get your head down, your bum up, and focus on the stuff that's in your visual eyesight that you can actually influence. And it's the old sort of story, think small to stand tall. A whole lot of little things done right. It's not going to give you immediate bang for your buck, but over time it actually will. Once again, I'm seeing within every sector, I'm seeing this K-shaped dynamic. And the reason we're seeing that K-shaped diversion, a lot of it's just microeconomics. It's firms that are being a lot more adaptive, creative, a different mindset versus those that have got this, it's going back to the normal. And there is a danger at the moment that because we've bounced out of COVID a lot better than expected, that people just think, oh, she will be right. Well, it's not. It's a fundamental reset. Change is accelerating. It doesn't matter, and on multiple levels.
I just want to remind the people listening or watching that you can ask questions as well. So I feel like I'm hogging all the time, but just throw a question in the question box. Now, Cam, if you have one thing you could fix across New Zealand right now, what would it be?
I'll give you two. One, people probably know I've got a bee in my bonnet about financial literacy across New Zealand, particularly in regard to kids. I'm on the board of Life Education New Zealand, which is old Harold the Giraffe. And we've just launched into high schools this year. We got massively disrupted. We called it Money Mojo because financial literacy is not a term that connects with kids, but we're also using theatre sports to teach the kids. So we're using something different as opposed to the normal classroom experience. But the thing that's really rubbing me up the wrong way at the moment is school attendance. So if you ever look at 2015, 70% of kids were defined as regularly attending school. In 2019, that ratio, that percentage has gone to 57.7%. So it's down 12 percentage points in 4 years. Now, where we're seeing the big decline in attendance is in primary schools. And I sit there and think about this thing is just mind-blowing to me because I just think about this through a pretty simple lens because unfortunately, ultimately, this is going to be the business sector's problem. If kids are not turning up to school, what do you think their work ethic is going to be like in regard to turning up to work in their 20s? Now, there might be some reasons for this, and the Ministry of Education has got a whole lot of, they characterise why kids are no longer sort of turning out. So we sort of got the data, but there's this big unknown factor as well. And the Ministry of Education now refers to it as a systemic trend. Well, it's a systemic trend in the wrong direction. Do something about it. If you look at Maori Pacific Island kids, 45% of kids are defined as regularly attending school. 45%. Now, to be regularly attending school, you've got to be there 90% of the time. All right, so the stat here is that 55% of Maori Pacific Island kids are basically taking more than one day off a fortnight. Now, whichever way you slice and dice it, I look at that and I just think about New Zealand's economic future. And as an economist, you look at the macro stuff, all the big picture, where we go in the next sort of 2 to 3 years. But I'm trying to get a bit of visualization where New Zealand is going to be 5 to 10 years out. And to me, 5 to 10 years out, the critical building blocks are education. And when I see those sort of stats, I sit there and think about that this is fundamentally wrong. And why has it not been more actively debated in regard to we need to be doing something about this. We need to be doing something pretty damn quickly.
I know offshore there's a whole lot of studies that show, you only, because what I imagine is you're not at school, so then you get behind and then you get further behind and there was probably more kids will fall through the cracks. And then you have issues, with a whole lot of unintended consequences that will cost so much money in the future through simple things like, I think you and I were talking one day about the financial literacy, and I was on my soapbox, and you kind of reminded me, if we've got a literacy issue, how do you teach people, how can they read financial stuff if we don't even have the literacy part of it right? You know, so it's that whole keeping people moving.
Yeah, and one of the, I think one of the lessons of this crisis, because there's always lessons in every downturn. One of the lessons of GFC, make the banks safer. I think one of the lessons of this one is that firms headed into COVID with probably not enough cash on hand, spare resources, rainy day money. So lesson is have a little bit more money for that rainy day. What's at the heart of that? Financial literacy. Just a little bit of financial knowledge, or as I said again, money mojo. And to me, like you've got to start young in regard to these sort of things. So never waste a crisis. If there's one time we can start to teach this sort of stuff and make it compulsory to kids, it's the next 2 to 3 years. Otherwise, it'll never take place.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because you kind of think it's probably a holistic thing. Like I talked with Ian Proudfoot yesterday, and we were talking about food and families and food strategy, and he's doing some great work at the moment. And I think, again, if we've got hungry kids as well that aren't going to school, or when they do go to school they can't learn, like we're just not setting the future up for success.
Oh yeah, absolutely right. And that I'm talking to people on the ground, right, that are actually doing those functions, and they are seeing increasing demand for their services. So we know there's an undercurrent across New Zealand at the moment where people are struggling like hell. And then you look at what's happening across the property market, and all of a sudden, little wonder we've got the gap between the haves and the have-nots debate. Things just become too far out of whack, right? And what happens when things get too far out of whack is that everybody points the finger at the government and they expect them to act, and now the government's pointing the finger at the Reserve Bank and try to unload their problems. But they're not the Reserve Bank's problems in regard to what we need. But we need some pretty clear solutions. And it's not just New Zealand. If you ever look at Joe Biden getting elected in America, Black Lives Matter, all this sort of stuff. It's not just about Black Lives Matter. It's about the gap between the haves and the have-nots. Labor's share of GDP has been declining for the past 40 to 50 years in America. Corporate share has been rising. But at the root, at the heart of all that's going on at the moment is that people are starting to think, look, we're not getting a fair share of the economic pie. We want a fair suck of the serve, so to speak. And we're seeing this down here in New Zealand as well, in regard to minimum wage, fair wage, that sort of stuff. And we need to get that rebalancing underway, but we need to get it underway in a sensible way that's not going to stuff the economy. Not going to result in firms just cutting jobs. So I saw there was a gentleman out this morning ahead of me on the AM show this morning, and he's talking about, well, we just need to pay people more. Well, I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure that the cart comes in front of the horse. You got to make things a bit more productive before you pay people more. But we know what we need to do. But how can you afford to pay people more in Auckland if all they're doing is driving around Auckland motorways and they're stuck in traffic? There's a whole lot of things that need to take place. But glass half full. Nice to see Commerce Commission being mobilised to have a look at a couple of sectors. It's not just about putting money into people's pockets. It's making sure there's less money going out the other side.
And do you think there'll be more of that? Do you think they'll be more active, or do you think it's just they're still going to be a little bit reactive to challenge, I guess?
Look, if I was the government, I'd be, because the Commerce Commission got 30 million in the 2020 budget, 10 million a year. I'd be like, go on, get stuck in. What the hell are you doing? Get another 5 to 10 people on board, and it's open season. They get quality people. Jerry, we used to work in the banking sector, right? So we know how it operates. Look at credit card fees, interchange rates, all this sort of stuff. There's more competition across New Zealand is going to benefit the average consumer, which is going to benefit New Zealand. So there's a whole lot of things that I think could be done without truly upsetting the apple cart, so to speak.
Yeah, and it sounds, even just not, I think we get a bit binary. So we focus on a thing. So if we pay everyone more, the world will be perfect. Or if we do this one thing, the world will be perfect. But what I'm hearing you say is it's actually a series of things that we need to work in, and again, start realigning that social fairness alongside economics, but not having a big pendulum shift that completely wipes out the economics.
Yeah, and the way I think about that pendulum shift is a lot through the long game versus the short game. The short-termism has been an absolute plague. Yeah, this is companies not investing in critical assets such as their runway. You're paying out big dividends as opposed to retaining earnings to invest in the future. Your property investors, they just go after capital gain as opposed to looking at the underlying factors in regard to cash flow, not being prepared to put the heat pump into the house to look after the tenants. It's like, well, come on, look after people, offer value, and over a 5 to 10 year window, you're going to make more money. But I think we're seeing a big strategic shift here where enterprises, and there's a fancy term which got brought up at the World Economic Forum earlier this year. We're moving from shareholder-based capitalism towards stakeholder-based capitalism. Yeah, fancy names. What does it mean? Short game is out, long game is in. But there's a whole lot of things that need to take place here at the moment, including the election cycle. 3 years is too short. Politicians are dreadful. One of the reasons infrastructure investment is poor across New Zealand because we take a short-term lens to it. So I hope Alan Bollard at the Productivity Commission, they're unleash him, and we have a lot more strategic 10, 15, 20-year planning in regard to think about infrastructure investment across New Zealand. But it's real simple. It's getting rid of short-termism, which has been an absolute plague.
Yep, and it's like I can even as you're talking, I can think about 50 examples in every sector really that I've seen. And I know the Sustainable Finance Forum recently actually talked about long-term perspectives and also KPIs. Having integrated KPIs that actually are focusing on long-term. Because you think of how business, and again, we were in banking. How short-term were the KPIs, and how contradictory often were they? And so you kind of I guess we're going to have a whole mindset shift.
You get into the last 2 months of the financial year, and there'll be a travel freeze and there'll be a hiring freeze.
Yeah.
And then start of the new financial year, you can hire again, and you can travel again. It was just nickel and diming to put a little bit of extra coin in the pot to make those financials look a little bit better. And this is just not just a problem with the organisations. It's actually a fundamental problem across the investor market as well, because the investors are demanding that sort of stuff. So we need to recondition the investment community in regard to what they're actually looking at, getting away from those knee-jerk reactions in regard to short-term results. Market still needs to be focused on whether you're delivering the goods, so to speak, in regard to you're making progress. But we see this time and time again. You miss your results, and all of a sudden your price gets knocked by 5 to 10%. Well, in the overall scheme, it's knee-jerkish. But it drives behaviour across management teams.
Yeah. And no one's thinking about what's the wider message here. What are we looking at? I mean, I know the work we've done with ESG, or environment, social governance. It feels, and I still have to do more work on it, but it feels a little bit like the New Zealand investor. And this is a terrible thing that someone said once, and I'm sure it's not true, but they said sometimes they worry that the New Zealand investor is more concerned about the quality of the morning tea at the AGM than the actual quality of the company. And I think we tend to see different behaviour. Awful, isn't it? Maybe sometimes accurate, but offshore, we're seeing quite a different behaviour from investors where they do push a lot more into those social parameters. There's activism, there's fund manager activism, and there's shareholder activism that's actually driving a very different psychology around how we invest and pushing to long term.
Yeah, and I think a fair bit of this as well is we probably need a lot more disruptors on boards across companies in New Zealand that think a lot more about the long game. And
how do we get them?
Well, I don't know. I've been vocal in a couple of private forums that said it's time for a lot of people to sort of push off. Get a new generation coming through, their time is done. But you sort of hope that organisations themselves will realise, look, we just need a different calibre of skills at the board level. Less accountants, less lawyers, more people that are a lot more strategic. The innovators. The problem with the disruptors is that, no disrespect, but they can be a bit of a pain in the ass because they're there to disrupt. So they're not the most easy people to deal with. And this is just
You work with me, Cam. You know that, for example.
but these are some of the things that we need, right? We need people asking fundamentally different questions, because the old model in regard to a company used to be, look, you need to answer two questions at the board, right? Do you have something that's unique within what you do? Because if you don't have something that's unique, well, how are you going to compete in the market? Secondly, do you have the right people to deliver on that? Those are the old questions. If you had 1 and 2, then by and large, your company is going to be okay. Now 1 and 2 are insufficient. You've got to be adaptive, creative. You've got to be just thinking differently, because you could get slotted from the side in regard to some innovation, some disruptive. But what's in the DNA of the organisation that makes you fast moving, adaptive? The modern word is agile. Out there, which is probably overused, but it's pretty well bang on the mark in regard to how we need to be thinking. And a lot of us is just embracing the younger generation, because they just think differently as well. Quite horrifies me some nights when I'm learning stuff off my 11-year-old in regard to how to use the technology equipment around the house. That's the way it is.
And I think it's I think we're still obsessed as well, I think, with diversity not being a veneer. So if you're a woman, you're going to be this, or if you have from a different race or different, but I mean, it's just about how we think. So if you have a board of people who think differently, then you're going to get agility, you're going to get some of that disruption, and you're going to get that different thinking. And I think that's probably where we're missing, and it's probably about some people making space for others to come in as well, because it feels like we sometimes just recycle.
But it's also it's a whole lot of different approaches. Like it's using any data you got to be a lot more ruthless is probably the wrong term, but if you've got information at your fingertips, it's going to improve your chance of success. It's not going to guarantee success, but it's going to make you a lot more accurate in regard to what your potential is to sort of be on the dartboard as opposed to off the dartboard, so to speak. But big issue out there at the moment is you can't leave innovation, these sort of things, disruption, to the private sector. Local governments, central governments, 1/3 of the economy. They need to be adapting, changing as well. And they are not adaptive change operators in regard to how they're thinking. And we're not going to turbocharge New Zealand productivity sense or aligning for the K-shaped cycle or digital economy, that sort of stuff, if we've still got the same old debates going on time and time again. Really interesting to see what's been going on, like Auckland Council, Tauranga, Wellington, and Invercargill. Now, COVID's just been an accelerant to highlight they've got fundamental problems. But the problems are going to pop up anyway.
And I think we probably had a little bit of the culture of turning a blind eye, or it is just this is just how it is. So we accept or we quietly move on. And I kind of applaud those who have the courage to stand up in the right way. I mean, it should never be personal, but I think when people stand up and are actually trying to get change, it's quite powerful.
Oh, absolutely. The problem is you got to be a brave person to be standing up in the local authority, central government arena. We've got a few good people, but we don't have the numbers that we need.
And unfortunately, in those sorts of environments, you don't attract awesome people either, because they go, oh, better things to do than this. I can go over here and do something more powerful and have more influence. So then it becomes a cycle of you just attract the same sort of person and you're not getting progress.
And the heart and soul of everything. One of the things I've really liked, post the election, was the Prime Minister came out and she promoted and demoted. which I think was a great thing because it sent a big message, right? The expectations are you need to deliver, and I think she's a lot more confident in the role. Yeah, but we need to broaden that out in regard to the next layers down in regard to getting the essentials, the good people in the right places.
Yeah.
And this includes the key advisory institutions, your MBs, your Treasury, these sort of places.
Yeah, the government agencies. And look, I mean, I've had a bit of experience, well, quite a bit of experience, and I think, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, but it feels at times there's a bit of a middle management constipation. Like it's a lot of stuff gets trapped in there, and it's just not getting, I guess, the progress that's needed. Because as you're saying, it's not just about one place. It's got to be the private sector. It's got to be the government, central government. It's all our responsibility. We can't point fingers and be shooting rifles of blame out. It's actually everyone working together and taking responsibility.
Yeah, but look, I'll give you, look, past 24 hours, I was Minister of Finance, sent a letter off to the Reserve Bank. How can we, how can you help in regard to the housing market, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? You go back to 2018, your house prices or asset prices were removed from the policy targets agreement. Well, what happened there? The likes of Treasury needs to be asked, well, why was it removed? Well, why did the government remove it in the first place? But these are sort of things that we need to be asking those direct questions now in regard to, well, should never have taken place. Sort of got snuck in because we were focused on other things, full employment, changes to the Monetary Policy Committee, decision-making process, that sort of stuff. But, just a fundamental mistake, and now we're going to have to correct that mistake.
Maybe you and I need to get on the road, do a bit of activism, be our new gig. Hey, so look, Cam, just to leave us with some thoughts. So looking at 2021, what do we need to think about? What do we need to focus on?
Well, if I look at this through a risk management lens, but the hope is we're okay. And we're certainly moving in the right direction at the moment. Every economic indicator I'm looking at looks a lot better than what we would have anticipated 3 to 4 months ago. But we're only a lockdown away from that economic situation changing massively.
Yeah. And
COVID is increasing around the globe. I think we're going to have a pretty rough winter in Europe, the United States. So there is a risk we get an incursion. So risk management, you're front and centre in regard to businesses. Hope is not a strategy. I still emphasise to people, look, think small to stand tall. It's about the micro. You can't control the macro, so just get stuck in on the micro level in regard to where it sort of sits. So, the K-shaped cycle, I'm a big believer in. Firms need to think about what they need to do to be on the top part of the K. So shake that complacency tree. Be prepared to take risk. And it sounds like an oxymoron at the moment, but not taking risk is no longer a risk-free strategy. Because if you're not taking risks, you are very strongly potential of being massively disrupted. And it's real hard to get into that Kiwi sort of psyche in regard to where it is. The final thing is that I encourage people is start to ask some hard questions and shake the tree of the politicians, of everybody. Because, I think New Zealand's at probably a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity here in regard to we could do a lot of great stuff. Or we could sit back and do what we normally do and think summer's around the corner and we've got the BMW, the batch, the boat.
Yeah.
And that's lovely. But, to me, it's not about myself. It's about the kids. It's about the grandkids. And I want to make sure that the kids and the grandkids inherit a better future. And, we've deployed all the resources at the moment. The government's borrowing a lot of money. Well, the kids are going to have to pay that back. Now, if we're not going to be hitting them with higher taxes, we've got to get stronger growth. We've got to have the economy going an awful lot faster. So the onus is on us to start making those hard questions and start to think about what we can do. Because if we don't drive the car faster, then it's going to cost more to fill it up down the track.
Yeah, and don't expect others to ask the questions, you know, literally step up, be brave. There's probably more people wanting to be brave, but it is a bit scary. As a outspoken human myself, at times it can be a little bit frightening when you're the only person saying it, but you find over time that you, I guess, give confidence to others. And you know, you've been amazing with that, Cam, where you've given confidence to others to speak out. You know, a lot of these things you've talked about, I remember you talking about 3-4 years ago. So, you know, it's, you know, you've consistently been open with the market and trying to help people and lead people and help them grow. And how do we inspire others to do that? You know, how do we give people the courage to be, I guess, the lone nut?
Yeah, and yeah, I'm gonna keep on writing stuff, putting stuff out there. I'm gonna keep on shaking the tree, but it's got to be fact based.
Yeah.
Try to drive the right decisions at the end of the day. Lead the horse to water, so to speak. You can't make it drink. In regard to
and as
what's going on.
Yeah. And as you've pointed out a few times today, also focus on what we are doing well. I think we get so hung up on the not so goods that we forget to actually celebrate where we're doing well. And I guess we can learn from those places that are the cave, you know, the people that have shaken that tree and got things going. What can we learn from them? How can businesses a bit scared to do that learn from their experience?
Yeah, well, I'll give you a stat to illustrate that, how good a position we are. So if you ever look at America's COVID cases, population adjusted like New Zealand, the case count they're getting up there is equivalent to New Zealand having about 2,000 to 2,500 a day. Sort of puts it in perspective in regard to what's going on. Yeah, imagine if we had that sort of case count. That'd be mind blowing. But that's where things are. So.
Oh, Cam, you're awesome. I can't wait to catch up with you again at some point, but I'm assuming you've been on radio and all sorts of things today and you've probably got more to go so far. We love your opinion pieces. Please keep them coming. It gives us a little bit of fire in our bellies and a little bit of confidence to keep driving, and you're awesome. So thank you so much for today. I'm very, very grateful.
Take care and enjoy the rest of it.
And we'll speak to you next year on this.
Cool. Looking forward to it.
See ya.
See ya. Bye.